Good afternoon, everyone. So happy to see so many participants today. We heartily welcome you all to Brindavan webinar. Today we have with us Dr. Akila Sadasivan, who will enlighten us on the topic, the role of executive functions in neurodevelopmental disorders. So we welcome you, ma'am, and all who are present here. So before we start the webinar, we would like to show you a short video about Brindavan Education Trust program. Once. Thank you. That was a short glimpse of Vrindavan Education Trust. Now I request Vidya Sharma to introduce our speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my immense pleasure to introduce Dr. Akila Sadasivan, ma'am. Dr. Akila Sadasivan is a director of Think Beyond Brain Care Solutions Private Limited and Summit Psych Services, works with children and youth over 20 years in Bangalore. She offers neuropsychological and clinical psychological services to children and families of children. She developed executive function training program to improve cognitive functions in children, adolescents, and adults. She has launched a digital brain training program known as Rewire Brain Training to improve executive functions in people. She served as Executive Council member for Indian Association of Clinical Psychology (IACP) and is a permanent life member of IACP. She is a registered practicing clinical psychologist with New Zealand Board of Psychologists. Akila is consultant clinical neuropsychologist for various NGO schools and organizations. She conducts training programs, workshops, and seminars nationally. She is teaching faculty for counselor training programs and special educator training modules in Bangalore and former visiting faculty for MPhil in Learning Disability, Mysore University. She won Best Poster Award at the International Conference on Mental Health held at Convention Centre Nimans, Bangalore. Also, she won the prestigious Sen Gupta Award at 36th National Annual Conference of India Association of Psychologists. Invited speaker at several conferences and seminars nationally and internationally, supervisor, mentor for clinical and counseling psychology students in IGNOU. She has published extensively in both national and international journals, books and chapters. Akila ma'am holds PhD from University of Canterbury, Christchurch, New Zealand, and MPhil from National Institute of Mental Health and Neuroscience, Nimans, Bangalore. Over to you, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Vidya. Welcome, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jayashree and Vidya, for that introduction. It's always a pleasure to be here and lovely to see the strides Brindavan is making and has continued to do in the space of special education. So it's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I just wanted to check if I've been enabled, sharing has been enabled for me, and can I share my slides? Yes, I think it has been enabled. My slides are
You
visible?
can go to the grid. Yeah.
My
It's
slides are
visible,
visible, right? Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on executive functions. I would like to make this as interactive as possible, but it is heavy on content, so that's a disclaimer right at the beginning. Maybe we could take questions at the end, or if you have something that you really cannot follow, please feel free to raise your hand and ask me questions. At any time, questions are welcome, right? So without much ado, I'd like to start off with the talk. Again, another disclaimer, I love telling stories, so I'm going to often slip into stories. I hope you don't mind. I'll start off with 3 stories of individuals who I have been or am currently seeing. I'm sure you would be able to relate to at least one of them in your lifespan. Let's talk about this child. Of course, name has been changed to protect the identity of the child. So, Sharmila, regardless of her age, clearly she's in school, maybe primary school, maybe middle school. She loves to play all the time. But the problem is that she has very few friends who she can play with. One of the most common friend or consistent friend that she has is her mother. She loves to play with her mother because the mother understands her. The mother can accommodate her despite so many difficulties that she faces. She's not able to communicate herself well. Her communication is not clear. She often struggles to retrieve words to describe whatever she wants. Because of these difficulties, and also because she's clumsy and she does not follow rules very well, school friends don't want to play with her. So they either run away when she requests for playing with them, or they tell her something and then, sort of leave her behind and then move on to playing with other people in another location. Because of this, she's very upset. And as a result of frequently being let down by her friends, she resorts to playing with children who are much, much younger than her. She tends to be more controlling of them. Sometimes she allows them to boss over her because otherwise she doesn't have any friends. So her mother is constantly worried. My child is either clinging to me when she has to play, or she's playing with children who are younger than her. And so, can I be helped, or rather, can my child be helped to fix this problem? Right? That's the first story. The second one is that of Sohan. Again, name has been changed. 24-year-old when I saw him. He was at that time, he had resigned, just recently resigned, as a salesman in a telemarketing company. His job primarily involved recording complaints of clients or customers, and then these complaints had to be passed on to a colleague who would then address these complaints. Because he had difficulties writing, he has always faced these problems when he was in school. He could not write down the messages, so he would rely on his memory. But his memory also was not very good. And so he would miss out on details and could not pass on all of the details of the customers to his colleague who had to act on them. If the colleague does not know what complaints to act on, then he may not be able to address all the complaints of the customers. And this often reflected poorly on the colleague who would point fingers at Sohan, and then Sohan would land in trouble, eventually to a place where he was getting very bad reviews at work, and therefore he had to quit. All right. Now, the third story, Arun. He is in his late 20s, almost close to 30s. He's currently pursuing a post graduation. He deliberately chose to live in a flat away from his own home. And he said that it's in the same city as his parents, he flats in another place far away. The reason why he chose to flat away from home is because he said, I don't want to be with my parents and under their guidance all the time. I seem to be relying upon my mother for a lot of things. What are some of these things? To stick to a schedule, to make sure whenever I have free time, I'm not only scrolling on my phone, and I'm also studying and covering my PG syllabus. I have trouble understanding and getting along with my friends. I have trouble estimating what their intentions are. They may come up and ask me a question, and I answer in all innocence, and that seems to land me in trouble because I'm not aware of the subtle undercurrents in a conversation, and I can't read between lines. He also has excessive amounts of trouble understanding the subtle emotions of other people. While he's very focused on his own emotions, unfortunately for him, emotions are happiness, anger, and maybe frustration. Beyond this, his repertoire of emotions are very limited. Because he has very limited understanding of his own emotions, he also has trouble understanding the emotions of other people. Right? So these are three stories. When you reflect upon these three individuals, you can unmute yourself and answer uh, any of these questions if you want. What kind of deficits or difficulties do you think these individuals are displaying? This is the first question, right? The next question, because barring Sharmila, the other two were pretty old. One was 24, the other was close to 30. Sharmila even is about, say, anywhere between 9 to 12-year-old. So were they always like this? If they were not always like this, then when did it start? And, is there something we could have done? What has contributed to these difficulties? And are there ways in which we can measure and improve some of these? Anybody wants to attempt answering the first question at least? What kind of deficits do you think these individuals are displaying?
Developing
Cognitive.
social skills.
Yeah,
Developing
cognitive
social skills, okay.
thinking,
Thinking abilities, all right.
remembering, problem
Emotional.
solving,
Yes, remembering, problem solving. Somebody said trouble processing emotions. Yes,
processing.
yes. Anything else? Okay, so these are terms that we tend to use, right? So, processing emotions, interpersonal skills, cognitive skills, thinking skills. These are some of the skills that we think broadly these children or these individuals may have trouble with. Then the next question, were they always like this? What do you think about that? Anyone? It doesn't matter. You can tell me what you think. Just listening to these stories, I know the thought that's running in all of your minds is, well, we don't know enough about these people,
They
but
might be having the problems, but that was not recognized in the early stages.
quite
And
likely,
so maybe it has increased in when they grew older, and then
right?
it was visible, quite visible, that they are having these problems.
Right. I like that answer. Maybe, like Vidya was saying, they always had this, it was not recognized, and now it's showing up more. Why do you think it's showing up more?
Because they tend
Maybe
to interact more
because
with
they
the
are
outside
working more
world.
with others.
Okay. Okay. Because they're interacting. I think both of you were saying the same thing, that they were interacting more, right? If you look at Sharmila, maybe not yet so much, but with the other two, they're out in the real world where they don't have either their teachers or their parents to support them, and they're left to fend for themselves, right? And that is something that I want you to think about. While we are so focused on the academic performance of a child that we see, we fail to understand that many of these difficulties extend beyond the realm of academics. What do you think could contribute to these deficits or difficulties that they're having? Like social skills, emotional regulation, interpersonal skills. What do you think can contribute to these difficulties?
So maybe they will have low self-esteem.
Okay, low self-esteem. Is it a cause for these problems or is it an
Is an
outcome
effect,
of these problems?
outcome of this, outcome of this.
So if you want to think of what is the cause for these problems.
Ma'am,
Sometimes
it could be
injury,
as
ma'am.
Yes,
sorry.
yeah, Sunita, go ahead.
Sometimes it may be the injury or neurological disorder, something like that.
It could be if there is, say, a head injury or there is an infectious disease that the individual had earlier on in their lives. But I can assure you, in these three stories, none of them had these. Yeah?
Ma'am, I
Maybe
Sorry?
maybe that they
Yes.
did not have opportunities to explore.
Okay.
Okay, तुमने
Maybe.
formality कर दी.
Maybe, but
Maybe
this
they are formality कर ली ना तुमने? हाँ, बस.
Varsha, I think you're saying
Yeah,
something.
maybe they are
Yes.
naturally introverted and lack the scope for self-expression.
Okay, could be. So either they have no opportunities or fewer opportunities, or that they, by nature, are the kind who would withdraw and not want to be very
Yeah.
social. Could be in certain cases. Out of the three, I know for sure two of them are not introverts.
Okay.
Then how do we explain this?
They are not getting good support from their immediate family.
Maybe, but remember, other than Sohan, Arun and Sharmila, their parents were supportive.
Okay.
Arun, in fact, decided to move out because he did not want to be depending so much on his parents, right? So these are questions that I want you to start thinking about, because these are often questions that puzzle us as well. Why is it that this individual is like this? And if we knew that these difficulties are there, can we measure it? Is it mild, moderate, or severe? And if the problem exists, can we do something about this? Right? Now, a broad term that is often used to describe all of these difficulties is what we often refer to as executive functions. And you'll be surprised at how many of these can be subsumed or consumed under the term executive functions, which I would refer to as EF moving forward in my presentation, right? So executive function, or EF, is an umbrella term which is used to describe a number of cognitive abilities or constructs. Now, these abilities are required for us not just when we're studying, not just when we're thinking, not just when we're trying to solve a problem, but on a routine day-to-day basis, we need this behavior to help us reach a goal, right? And this particular definition talks of executive functions as being called upon when our routine behavior is not enough to reach our goal. What do I mean by that, right? Now, for example, I heard at the beginning, as I was being let into the webinar, I heard someone saying that the link that has been shared is not working effectively for some people. There were already some 20-30 people using the same link who have entered this conversation, but there were some who were waiting, who wanted to be a part of this conversation, but for some reason were not able to. So when the organizers are given this information, how do they solve that problem? It's not a routine problem. Routine problem is, or a routine behavior is, I create a link, I share it with the participants, and when the time comes, I come in ahead of time and I open the same link so that I can let people in. Routine behavior. People will click the link and they will then be asked to either type in the password, or the link will directly bring them into the webinar, and I will be able to let them in. Routine behavior. But I'm struggling to join the webinar given the, or using the same link that you have given, is non-routine behavior. So clicking that link, which is routine behavior, is insufficient to achieve the goal of attending this webinar. Therefore, your executive functions will be called upon for you to be able to solve this problem. So you play with ideas. So what can I do? Can I call them individually and talk them through? Or maybe if I do that, then I won't be able to start the webinar on time. So can I allocate this job or responsibility to someone else? Then you play with different ideas. Think of what can be the consequences of each of those ideas. And then before you act on it, choose the one that seems to be most appropriate. You choose something that's not working, it's an unexpected challenge. Can you do something about it? And then, I'm so tempted to pick up a cup of tea because today is an exceptionally cold day in Bangalore. And so, if I go to make tea, then I can't deal with this problem. But can I say it's okay, I will suffer through this just for today because I have to sort this problem. So I resist the temptation of making tea and instead sort this out and stay focused on the goal. All of these are aspects of executive functions which help us to achieve the goal of making this webinar possible, and making it possible for the people to attend, gain something, and maybe not keep the speaker waiting for too long, right? So in a simple activity like this, which is otherwise can be routine, when something goes way off target or even slightly off target, we all call upon our executive functions to be able to sort it out. So executive functions, the ultimate aim of it is to achieve a goal. So it's a goal-directed activity or a set of cognitive abilities required to achieve a goal. It requires self-monitoring. Somebody said motivation and self-concept or self-esteem. So your executive functions helps develop the self-esteem through this self-monitoring. It has access to working memory and attention. You also work through, somebody said, thinking and planning. So organization, priority, mental flexibility, and to be able to switch between options. All of these are executive processes. You have cognitive processes and you have emotional processes, both of which are required in a social situation or to build healthy interpersonal relationships. Then you also have, lower order, which are the core basic functions. And then you have higher order executive functions, which depend on the lower order. For example, goal setting, organization, prioritizing, self-monitoring are higher order or second order executive functions, while attention, working memory, mental flexibility, and inhibition are lower order. right? So when I speak of maybe cognitive control or core executive functions, I'm talking about these three or sometimes four, the fourth one being attention. I've deliberately not put attention here because a lot of times you need attention for all of these three to function. So it's a subsumed function, right? So what are these four core abilities? Of course, attention. Sometimes it's called executive attention. We'll talk about that in a short while. We have working memory, which is also known as updating of information, where you're talking of mentally manipulating items. For example, you have to say 7 times 8. All right. And then to that answer, you add 13. So first you have to solve what is 7 times 8. Maybe it's 56, maybe it's 42, whatever the answer you come up with. And then to that, you have to add another number. To hold on to both the numbers and put it together, you need working memory. Another example of working memory is I'm reading a passage that has been given. The passage has 3 paragraphs. There's information in first, second, and third paragraphs, which are important for me to understand the whole text and then start answering the questions. I need intact working memory for me to be able to read the first paragraph, hold on to that information, then read the second paragraph, add information from the first paragraph into the second paragraph, and then add that into the third paragraph to make sense of the whole passage. And constantly, maybe I've read something about, let's say the passage is about gorillas, and I've read something about, like the first statement was, gorillas are the ancestors of human beings. And then the second paragraph says, well, that's actually a misnomer. It's a myth. Gorillas are not precursors to humans. And, there's another animal which now has been found to be, sharing closer genetic load to human beings than gorillas. Now, I need to update my information and then be able to answer the question correctly, which says, who is ancestor to human beings? Is it gorillas or is it another species? So this updating is what working memory does. Then response inhibition is self-control, our ability to resist temptation, to be able to control impulses, which we often see as behavior in a classroom. We see as silly mistakes in a math worksheet. For us to be able to say, well, I'm on a diet, I'm not going to reach out for the chocolate. Instead, I'm hungry and I can maybe make a salad for myself. And I show control and inhibit my impulses. Mental flexibility is the ability to think of alternatives and to get another perspective on behavior. I'm very angry because my friend, said he will play cricket with me today, and he's not playing cricket. Instead, he's gone off to play football. And when I asked him, he said, you also join us and play football with us. I'm playing football because my neighbors have decided to play football. I'm angry because I came expecting to play cricket, and now he's telling me to play football. So mental flexibility allows me to decide whether I'm going to be angry with him and not play at all, or to adapt to this change and say, well, today I will play football, but since you promised me, tomorrow you have to come to my place and play cricket. That way I get to play today and I get to play tomorrow also, right? That is an aspect of mental flexibility. So 3 core, or rather 4 core executive functions, which are often clubbed together under a heading called as cognitive control, that is attention, working memory, response inhibition or inhibitory control, and mental flexibility or set shifting. These are the 4 core abilities. I'll keep talking about these through my talk today. And when I say executive functions, I probably refer to these as my core abilities. So if you look at the 3 people that we spoke of, the inability to put down his phone that Arun was talking about, inability to process the subtleties in his friends' conversations, Sharmila's inability to express herself, Sohan's inability to remember the details. All of these are in some form or the other reflective of cognitive deficits. More than 90% of the time, issues that we face with children in a classroom setup or in a group setup would stem from executive function. So either the executive function deficits are the manifestation of these behavior problems, or they are the cause of the behavior problems in these children, which means then it becomes important for us to understand executive functions. So why executive functions? Earlier, when we looked at, say, learning disability or ADHD, we would look at only academic functions and we would look at, say, intelligence at best. But why are we talking about executive functions? Here's the interesting thing, right? One, executive functions, like many of the other cognitive abilities, develops starting from, say, the age of about 6 month old infants. That's when executive functions for the first time is seen. From there, it starts developing and continues to develop for the rest of our lives. The interesting part is that so when you look at children from the day they are born till about, say, they're about 13, 14, their abilities keep developing, maybe even till they're 15. Their cognitive abilities, many of their motor functions, language functions, moral values, all of these develop. They don't develop linearly. So in the sense that there are specific growth spurts. So there'll be a sharp increase from, say, 0 to 2 years, and then maybe 2 to 3 years, there is a plateau. Then again, another spike till about, say, 5 years. Then there is a plateau. Then again, another spike at 9 years, then a plateau, and then another spike between 11 and 12 years of age. So it's like a stepwise development. Strangely enough, interestingly enough, executive functions also show a stepwise increase in children, and the peaks in executive functions parallel the peaks in these cognitive abilities in children, or not just cognitive, but overall development. And when I say overall, I mean motor coordination, I mean intellectual development, I mean cognitive abilities, I mean academic skills. Along with this, of course, social and moral skills as well. So whenever there is a hike or a spike in these abilities, you also see a spike in executive functions. Particularly with regard to academic achievement, when you see a spike, you will also see a spike in executive functions. And the third interesting component is math skills, particularly linked to working memory and inhibition, reading to working memory and mental flexibility, which means that you need executive functions, and the executive functions have to be intact for smooth transition of one stage of development of each of these skills into the next. Which means that if from reading letters to reading words to reading phrases to reading sentences is a transition that a child has, the child will then rely upon working memory, mental flexibility, and attention to be able to make this transition smoothly. Similarly, with math, the child will depend on working memory and inhibition and attention to be able to make the transition from understanding the numbers on the number line, understanding numbers that come before and after, understanding how addition and multiplication are similar or complementary, how division and subtraction are complementary, and how all of these work, and then move on to, say, fractions, decimals, algebra, geometry, and so on. So in order for us to profit from the inputs that we get or the experiences that we have, we need to have intact work, executive functions. Now, going back to those three cases, some of you said they may not have had exposure or they may not have had enough experience with peers for them to build the social skills. But then I pointed out, or they may not have had support from their family. Then I pointed out saying the mothers in 2 of the 3 cases were very supportive. Now, how do we explain this? Now you see that even if they have exposure, if they did not have intact executive functions, they may not be able to pick up these skills despite repeated practice. And I want you to keep thinking about that, right? So what have we established so far? That executive functions develop alongside academic functions, and there's enough evidence to say this. Therefore, early detection of these specific, when I say cognitive deficits, I mean executive function deficits, seems to be crucial in trying to identify these problems. And you'll be surprised that not just with learning disability and ADHD, with depression and anxiety also, we have seen executive function deficits, not just with children, but with adults as well. And especially in anxiety and depression, studies have shown that way before the development of the symptoms of anxiety and depression, they have identified cognitive deficits to the tune of executive function deficits in individuals, which means that if you detect executive function deficits in these individuals early and you work on it by training them, providing suitable cognitive training programs, you can actually prevent a full-blown issue in these individuals. Interesting. Does this happen with neurodevelopmental disorders in the neurodiverse population? Is debatable, but early detection means we can contain the deficits, and identifying what are the deficits will help us to develop a suitable cognitive program. And I will talk to you about the cognitive program. So how do
Ma'am, I
we...
had one query.
Yes, Pooja.
Yeah, so as I understand, EF is using the cognitive functions in, connection with each other. So to perform a task, we are using, time management, memory all together.
Okay.
So, but by the definition, is it that EF is a different cognitive function, or it is dependent on the cognitive abilities?
EF is a set of cognitive abilities. So cognitive abilities are not separate from EF, right? So
Okay.
what do I mean by cognitive abilities? Thinking,
Hmm.
reasoning,
Hmm.
abstraction,
Hmm.
attention, working memory. Yes?
Hmm.
So you can already see I've started naming a few which come under executive functions.
Okay, so is it possible that people have a good these individual capabilities, but in spite of that, their EFs are poor?
Absolutely.
And so,
We've
what could
had...
be the factors contributing to that?
Right. So we have people who are called double exceptional. All right. What do we mean by that? These are children whose IQ is 3 standard deviations above the norm, which means they are gifted.
Okay.
They also have learning disability, and when you evaluate them, their executive functions are not on par with their intellectual abilities. So there's a
Yes.
huge gap, right? So
Yes.
which means that you can have intact intelligence, but you can
Mhm.
have deficit executive functions,
Okay.
right? Sometimes you can see that there is a child who has exceptional intelligence, but the IQ score is in the average range. That could be because their executive functions has interfered with their performance during the testing. And we often talk to parents about that. And that's what we refer to as scatter. So despite having intact cognitive abilities in certain domains, if even one of those executive functions that I mentioned, there is a deficit, it can have a significant impact on the overall functioning of the individual. What causes that? Very interesting question. I don't want to digress too much, but very briefly, I will talk to you about the neuroscience behind it and the brain regions that are there. And I hope that you would be able to understand it when I talk about that.
Okay.
All right. And at that time, maybe Pooja, you can come back and ask me that question if I still haven't clarified your doubt.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. So just to give you an idea of how do we, if I cannot assess executive functions myself, then how do I know where what I'm seeing is actually executive functions? This is based on clinical observations. I've just laid it out for you. Very, very young children, children who are just like infants and just entering school from 0 to 5 years, you don't see it as I can't remember or I don't know how to write. You see it as extreme anxiety, strong school refusal, very, very silent in school, but naughty and active at home. Could often be associated with delays in generally developmental milestones, particularly with speech or motor milestones. And some of them also when there are seizures. And when I mean seizures, I don't mean the regular seizures only. I also talk of febrile seizures, because many times, as far as a neurologist is concerned, as far as a pediatrician is concerned, 1 or 2 episodes of febrile seizures, sorry, don't fall under the whole classification of seizures. And so many a times they are not even treated with anti-epileptic drugs or AEDs as they are called. They are given frisium, which is to contain the fever so that the child's body temperature does not spike and that doesn't result in a seizure. Fair enough from a treatment perspective. But from a clinical perspective, what we often see is even if there is a single episode of a febrile seizure, more than 70% of such individuals develop executive function deficits, which eventually leads to, academic difficulties or behavioral difficulties. So keep that in mind. Then, from 5 years to 9 years of age, we see them as either shy and withdrawn or aggressive and irritable. They're not able to sit for long. Uh, the settling down in a school environment, which probably started off when they were in nursery or LKG, continues into grade school. These are the children who are often wandering about in the classroom. They have trouble switching between multiple languages. They have either few friends or no friends at all, or they may have many friends, but they often get into trouble and in fights with their friends and come back home angry, saying, I don't want to go out and play with my friends anymore. And they fail to understand the consequence of their own actions. This can be seen as, you tell them, they will tell us, this is not a behavior that I expect or appreciate. They will, apologize, and they're genuine in their apology. 10 minutes later, half an hour later, one day later, you send them out, the same behavior is repeated, right? So it's not that they don't understand how to behave. It's in the moment they fail to remember this is how they should behave, and they tend to get into trouble because of that. Moving on to the next stage, now they're adjusted into grade school. This is where the lagging behind in academics will either start becoming more prominent
Very
or,
cold.
sorry.
Why you come?
Okay, I thought you were asking me a question. All right, this is where they start falling behind their peers. It becomes more obvious, or with things like maths, this is where it begins to show. So often parents tell me, especially with dyscalculia or math disorder, that till grade 4, grade 5, my child was doing well, was scoring in A grades, and suddenly my child started falling behind. Dislike for writing, incomplete notes, lying about assignments, not writing in tests, and then again, like I said, having trouble maintaining friendships. So all of these we see more frequently and more intense during the middle school years. And then by the time, and this is, I'm talking about when you don't identify that they have neurodiversity or they have neurodevelopmental disorders, or you've done nothing about their executive functions. By the time they're 13, this has resulted in poor self-esteem. There's very poor motivation to study. I've had children who come to me and say, there was a boy whose father was very worried because his child said, I don't want to be in school anymore. I want to be working in a farm and I want to become an agriculturist. I will not study. Right? And he was very, very good with growing plants. And, thankfully the father was able to find an alternate school which did both, but his motivation to study consistently was very low. They're very unsure of themselves. Even if they have the right answer, they may not raise their hand and volunteer to answer in class. They withdraw. They set unrealistic goals for themselves, which then leads to a failure in performance, which then leads to secondary anxiety and depression symptoms. They show a lot of immature behavior, and a lot of parents report this, that my child certain times behaves in an age appropriate manner, but oftentimes behaves like, he or she is very immature and I don't know what to do about it. They don't take initiative. I have to keep pushing them. I tell them this is what you should do. And by now, I want my child to be able to study on his or her own, but I'm finding that I have to sit with my child. And if I'm sitting, the child studies well. The moment I walk away, then the study session collapses, right? Because they lack initiative and they have great trouble sticking to a routine. So the model that we often operate for neurodiverse children, especially with learning disability and ADHD, is that while all of us are focusing on the disorder, which could be academic or behavior, the core deficit we fail to acknowledge, which stems from executive function deficits, attention deficits, and the visuomotor coordination. That is the core, which started much, much earlier. And like Vidya rightly said, a lot of them have it right from the beginning, and then it progressively increases to which eventually, so learning disorder, ADHD, of course, we diagnose by the age of 3. That's the earliest probably we can with certainty diagnose it. Learning disability, we diagnose much, much later, maybe after 6. But before that, the core deficits have already been started showing their signs. And the lag starts from about 6 months of age. If we don't pick it up, the lag starts happening from then, right? Which eventually, by the time they hit adolescence or double figures in their years, the skill deficits also come in, which looks at social skill deficit, inability to process information or even acknowledge emotions, and that leading to problems with motivation, self-esteem, and self-image. So just to give you an idea of some of these core abilities, I told you I'll come back to attention. There are 2 kinds of attention, an endogenous and an exogenous attention. Let's start with understanding the endogenous attention. This is more, in our control. For example, you may be having visitors coming later on in the evening to your house, but right now you're focusing your attention on this webinar. So it is focused, it is in your control, which is what I mean by active control, and it's a top down. That means that from your frontal lobes, which is the seat of your higher intelligence, you're being directed to pay attention to this. And you may be aware that, okay, potatoes are boiling on the stove, or the Blinkit order is waiting at my dining table and I have to go and sort out the vegetables for the evening. You are aware of those things, but you're actively choosing to say, okay, for these 2 hours, I'm going to focus on this. And then next 2 hours, I will go ahead and look at completing my cooking so that I can welcome my guests in the evening, right? So there is that allocation of your attentional resources, which you are doing willfully. And that's what we mean by top down. There is a control and you are allocating attention. Maybe, you have your camera switched off and you're peeling peas while you're talking to me, or you're listening to me talk, right? So that is what we often refer to as the dorsal attention system, which is controlled by the frontal eye field and the intraparietal sulcus. Not important for you to know, but just to tell you that they're in different locations in the brain, there is control of this happening. So what do I mean by this? Let's say you're driving a car and you're going somewhere. It's a familiar road. You finished your shopping or whatever, and you're going back home. The way to your home is very familiar. It's the last stretch of the road. You're talking to your friend. You know how much attention you have to pay to the road while you're driving. So maybe you allocate 60% of your attention to the conversation you're having with your friend, because it's a very interesting conversation that you're having, and 40% attention to the driving, because it's a familiar road, you're in control, and you're a good driver, you're a responsible driver. So one becomes automatic or semi-automatic, and the other becomes a more attention-driven activity, which is the first kind of attention that we were talking about in the previous slide, which is your endogenous attention. You drive your attention towards the conversation that you're having with a friend. The conversation gets heated up and you get into an argument. You're very angry. You and your friend having a difference of opinion. Your friend says something, you say something to counter that, and the conversation becomes heated. You're still able to focus. Now maybe the attention on the conversation is 70% or 80%, and only 30 or 20% of attention goes to the road. You're still able to do a decent job of both, and that is what your exogenous attention is allowing you to do. Suddenly you see a snake in the road. This acts as a circuit breaker, right? Bam, you hit the brakes, and in that moment, the shock of seeing a snake on the road, because that's not something that you're expecting, it's something that jumped out at you. The conversation with your friend comes to a halt. The disagreement sort of disappears, poof, like almost like, a bubble that burst. And you're just focusing on the snake. There's palpable anxiety. Did I hit the snake? Was it a cobra? Where did the snake come from? These are all thoughts that come to you after you have hit the brakes, right? That is exogenous attention. That is an involuntary attention, and it's driven by the environment and it's automatic, right? Which means that you don't stop to think, wait, is that a cobra? Should I hit the brakes or can I run over it? Or will the snake go? You don't. You see the snake and you hit the brakes. Or the conversation is too interesting. I don't care what happens to the snake. I'm going to keep fighting. I won't. No. This is an involuntary action. You see the snake, you may not even have processed it as a snake. It's something that comes in your way, you hit the brakes. That is involuntary. And that's what exogenous attention does. That when things are going according to plan, it's your endogenous attention. It is a driven, voluntary attention that happens. But there is a change in the environment, and suddenly the ventral attention system lodged in your inferior frontal gyrus and the temporoparietal junction in your brain switches into action mode. It becomes involuntary because of the change in the environment. It's an automatic change, and then you learn to allocate attention to what is happening here. Once that's gone, maybe you park your car somewhere, you and your friend laugh about it, your hands were shaking, you bring it under control. Then you go back to your endogenous attention. You go back to driving the car. Maybe you pick up the fight. Maybe the fight is forgotten. That's immaterial, right? So you switch from dorsal attention system to ventral attention system depending on the environment, right? Now bring that to a classroom. Teacher is teaching, endogenous attention. Suddenly, the principal comes in to make an announcement. You have to switch from teaching mode to listen to the principal. Or the bell rings and it's lunchtime. The children are packing their bags. That is from endogenous attention. It becomes exogenous attention because the bell has indicated to you class is over and it's lunchtime now. We constantly and seamlessly seem to switch from this to another. When there is a deficit in attention, this switch is very difficult. You're watching television, or your child is watching television, and then you're saying, or television, of course, is an old example. Forgive me for my age. Maybe now they're playing on their phone or your phone, or they're playing on a tab. And then you say, playtime is over. Turn off the phone, or give me the phone, or turn off the tab. Now it's study time. That switch, or looking at the time and it's 6 o'clock now, it's study time. That switch does not happen smoothly for individuals with executive function difficulties. Second kind of executive function is the inhibition or self-control. For us to be able to break a habit. I'm used to waking up at 7 o'clock. Now my school is starting an hour earlier. I have to wake up at 6. That habit to be broken requires inhibitory control. It allows us to be in control of ourselves. I have to say, ma'am, you're talking too fast. I can't understand what you're saying. But then if I say that, then maybe her thoughts will be interrupted. So I'm going to wait till she says any questions, and then I'm going to make this comment, right? Ability to control ourselves and be in charge of what is happening. Ability to allow us to look at another person's aspect, like the argument we were having when we were driving. Maybe my friend has, an angle to this. Let me look at things from his or her perspective. Ability to suppress attention. All right, there is a loud drilling going on, construction work going on in my neighbor's house. I will ignore that sound and pay attention to this webinar because this is really important for me. Suppressing attention and not paying attention to other stimuli. If we have to suppress a prepotent response, I love eating chicken, but then today is Saturday, I should not eat. Somebody else is eating, I'm tempted, but I'm still not going to. Suppressing the prepotent response, self-control. Okay, and because of all of this, of course, it's related to working memory as well. Another way in which we see this is quickly jumping to conclusions. That I look at the situation, my friends were talking. When I entered the room, they were all laughing. And as soon as they saw me, they stopped talking and they looked away. So I jumped to conclusions. Boss, they were talking about me and they were saying something rude about me. The moment I came, they all looked away. That means that they're all talking about me. So I become angry and I go on guard, and that interferes with my ability to relate to them. Jumping to conclusions can be because of poor impulse control, can also be because of poor mental flexibility, and often the two are interrelated, resulting in either blurting out the first thing that comes to your mind or resulting in incorrect actions. How many times we've hit the send button for a message without proofreading it? The number of times I've edited. Thankfully, WhatsApp now comes with an edit button, but before that, always my messages would have errors in it, right? So impulse control. Maybe if time permits, I could talk about this child. I'll come back to the orange pencil, right? This child, he wanted the orange pencil, and if he saw the orange pencil, he would only use orange pencil. And if we didn't show him the orange pencil, he was happy to use all other pencils in the room. But the moment he saw the orange pencil, that was all he wanted, right? He couldn't ignore it and use other pencils. Similarly, when we are very, very angry, what do? We cannot ignore the most obvious explanation for what happened because we're already angry. How do we ask our children to control their anger? Don't react, don't respond, count backwards, and then respond to a situation. It's something that we often tell. It's a very common sense thing to do. Why do we do that and how does that work? It's a very beautiful explanation. There is a small region in the thalamus known as the subthalamic nucleus, which is responsible for this. So the subthalamic nucleus has a direct connection to the frontal lobes. Usually, the subthalamic nucleus is related to the amygdala. Amygdala helps us to respond to a situation with emotions, like, say, the fight or flight. The snake, I saw the snake and I hit the brakes because of my amygdala, because that is protective in nature. That tells me you're in danger and you have to, the fight or flight response. Somebody is coming to attack you, so either you hit back or you hide under the table, right? That is driven by the amygdala. Amygdala won't think. But the frontal lobe is a more deliberate thing. It will think, it will plan and say, is this logical? Should I do this? Should I do that? You can't do that when a snake is there. Is this a poisonous snake or not? When I stop to think, maybe the snake will bite me. Therefore, the amygdala is needed to protect us. But most of the time in social situations, you need the frontal lobes, which will then tell you, if you do this, this will be the consequence. If you do that, maybe that might be useful for you in the long run. But most often, we don't wait for the frontal lobes to kick in. The subthalamic nucleus acts as a pathway or a gateway for this switch to happen. So either in therapy or when we talk in simple terms, commonsensical terms, when we ask somebody, don't respond immediately, but stop, wait, think, and then respond. What we're actually doing is giving enough time for the subthalamic nucleus to communicate with the frontal lobes, and then the frontal lobes will set the plan of action and then take a very deliberate action in situations, right? So just to demonstrate how inhibition can work, I have a very small activity. Maybe somebody can volunteer. It's a very quick 2-minute activity, and I think it'll break also this monotony of my lecture. Anyone, if you can volunteer, please. Anybody. It's a very simple activity. Turn on your camera and then we can, so that I can.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Vidya. Yes, Vidya, I can see you. So, all right, here's the thing, right? I will call out a few words, and the moment you hear whatever word I say, tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. All right, so it's really important that you say the first thing that comes to your mind. Okay, white.
Hair.
Clouds.
Rain.
Donkey.
Animal.
Okay, somebody said kick. Okay, accepted. Door.
What? Door.
Door, yes.
Door. Bell.
Okay. Mirror.
Your face.
Okay. Switch.
Light.
Sweet.
My taste.
Okay, all right. Now, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to give you different set of words. You have to make a change. Don't tell me the first thought that comes to your mind. Don't tell me the second thought that comes to your mind, but tell me the third one. Okay, ready? Slippers.
Outside.
Beauty.
Brain.
Washing.
Hands.
Plate.
Food.
Okay. Compared to the first activity, Vidya,
Yeah.
In terms of difficulty, comparing the two, which one do you think was more difficult?
The second one.
Why? Why was it difficult?
Because you had to skip the things like first, second, and you had to think further, like what is the third thing, like in your mind.
Correct, right? And that's what that is exactly the description of inhibition. Thank you so much for volunteering. So I hope you understood what inhibition really is all about, right? That we have to overcome this immediate response, and all of us are in that sense impulsive. Somebody rings the doorbell, we don't even stop to think, we run to open. But if we were to be less impulsive, we would think, who could it be? Is it safe for me to open? And then I will use the peephole to see, and then put the chain and then open. You see? So impulse control is this exactly, that there are 2 layers or 3 layers even of filters that guard or guide my behavior. This is what impulsivity so the first response is impulsivity. Impulse control refers to my ability to put these filters in place. How often do we put those filters in place? Maybe as far as behaviors in social situations, like if my boss is around, I would be well behaved. If the principal is around, I will be polite. If my parents are at home, then I know how to behave. The moment my parents go out, only my nanny is with me, then I don't have to behave myself, right? Is exactly this that is happening. Emotional regulation is another example of impulse control, and it's a hot cognition. So the cold cognition is the activity that we did just now, which has to do with the cognitive abilities. I can do the same with numbers, maybe. Think of an odd number, but no number that has a 2 in it. Can be a way of suppressing the prepotent response. Sorry, think of an even number, but don't think of any number with a 2 in it, right? Would be a way of suppressing those impulses. That's a cold cognition. A hot cognition, on the other hand, is an emotional regulation. When you are angry, you say the first thing that comes to your mind, there is no control of your impulses. But you wait for the subthalamic connection to hit or reach the frontal lobes. That then becomes regulated emotion, right? So instead of an automatic response, we control. That is when emotional regulation comes into place. And that's where, like, my last statement here says, is the prefrontal cortex, which takes over. The third component, so we've spoken about attention, which is 1, working memory, which is 2, sorry, inhibition, which is 2, and now we're talking about working memory, which is the third one. Most of us seem to know, working memory. This is the ability to hold on to multiple bits of information on a template. It's like, those of you who are familiar with computer language, you have the RAM, or the random access memory of a computer, which holds on to some data while you're working on it. The moment you finish and you shut down the computer, or you close that application, that memory will disappear. It's not stored anywhere. While you're working on it, you require it and it's used. That's exactly what happens to working memory. So if I'm trying to write a story, then that idea remains in my mind, and those words and those sentences come into my mind, and I get a picture, and I have a sequence, and I type it out. Once I finish typing, there's no need for me to hold on to these anymore in my mind, and so all of the sentences, the words can disappear. So that is working memory, right? For as long as I'm writing the answer, I need the content in my mind, then I can forget it. Or for as long as I'm doing the calculation, I need to remember my tables, then I don't need to access it. It could be verbal working memory, or it could be non-verbal or visuospatial working memory. And This is required for us for many things, right? Like I told you earlier, to read a passage or a story and to understand. For us to understand what came first, what came next, the temporal sequencing of things, right? When I have to describe how my holiday went, we left from Bangalore, reached the airport or reached the railway station, and then the train got delayed, and this is what we did. And so that unfolding of events in a sequence, this is what happens. Then it's also necessary for understanding spoken language. So oftentimes we speak of reading accuracy, sorry, and reading comprehension. For reading comprehension, working memory is important. So if comprehension is low, it does not mean that the linguistic skills of the child is poor. It could well mean that the working memory is poor, right? So you read the passage, and if the child can understand better, then it's not a language issue, it's an issue with working memory. Child reads, cannot comprehend. I read, child can comprehend. Obviously, it's not a language issue, it's a working memory issue, right? Often the parents will say that my child has to read or reread in order to be able to understand, and therefore the child gives up. Having trouble with mental calculations, that also means deficits in working memory, and to be able to have multiple alternatives for a given problem. All of this, when we have to particularly translate it into action. What do I mean? In math, it's very, very evident. You have a working column, and then you have the your like your rough column and your fair column. In the rough column, you do all your working out. You have the answer. Let's say the answer is 41. You have to bring it down into the fair column. When you do it there, instead of 41, you write 14. That's because your working memory has failed you, right? Reasoning ability also requires working memory because it has to keep this. So this is correct, this is correct, this is wrong. Therefore, this theorem is what I need to apply. That for us to reach that, it may not be logic that's the problem. Logic is okay, but because I can't remember all the facts, I can't apply the right kind of logic, right? And also, of course, sequencing to remember past, present, and future, you need the working memory. And the fourth and the final one, mental flexibility or set shifting, is your ability to consider alternatives and to be able to change perspectives. Like I said, fighting with my friend, I'm fighting because I cannot see his or her perspective. Both of us can be right, and I choose to stick to this and you choose to stick to that, and let's be respectful of each other, is something that we often use in social situations, but many a times we fail to describe this or train our children for this, and therefore seeking or seeing another person's perspective in a situation becomes difficult. This, if we are able to achieve, allows us to be creative when we are looking at something, and that's what allows us also to solve a problem, to be able to adjust. Like, okay, I was studying, my plan was to study 10 hours today because tomorrow I have an important exam. And then it so happened that my sister called and I had to speak to her because she had an emergency at work. She was panicking and she called me and I lost an hour. What do I do? Maybe while having my lunch, I had a lunch break for 1 hour. While having my lunch, I will continue to study to make up for this 1 hour. Or later in the evening, I was going to watch TV to relax. I can give up my TV time and sacrifice that for my sister. So ability to adjust to changing demands. Another very, very important thing which we often see with children, ability to admit that you made a mistake, right? If you ask them how you did in your paper, most often they will say, oh, I did exceptionally well. And then when the marks are low, why did this happen? Oh, my teacher's conjures, she doesn't give marks. Inability to see that you made a mistake, right? Of course, highly dependent on inhibitory control and working memory. If you look at the developmental progression, at the age of 6 or 7 months, inhibitory control starts showing up. Then from the age of about maybe 9, 10 months or so, working memory starts developing and continues to grow till maybe about 3 years of age. And 3 years of age is where the flexibility starts. So that's the last to develop. Flexibility continues to develop and reaches a sort of workable state by the time the child is 5 or 6. And that's when all the three come into place, and you can see beautifully the education system is such that you're in preschool till then, and when all these three are really well developed, that's when you go to the next stage, which is your grade school, where the expectations are that you will copy from the board, you will follow instructions, you will sit in your place and not wander in your class, because by then at least a certain level of executive maturity, executive functioning and maturity as far as executive functioning is concerned is expected. So what are, I think, Rupa, this was your question, right? What are some of these functions and where does it go wrong? To answer that question, we need to understand where this is located in the brain. There are large areas in the brain, the frontal, superior frontal lobes, particularly the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Then you have the fusiform gyrus, which is in the temporal lobes of the temporoparietal junction, and the superior parietal lobes. These three regions are really crucial and important for the development of the executive functions. And any activity that we do that stimulates these regions will also stimulate the executive function network. Now, three core areas, we went from this region to this network to, a connectivity to understand executive functions. But this three system network seems to be the most crucial to understand executive functions. Simple thing. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the posterior parietal cortex is what is required for when we are paying attention to a given activity. Let's say I have to study for my math exam tomorrow, and my mother has set a math question paper for me, which will take 45 minutes. For me to work through that paper, I need my central executive network to be intact. For any goal-directed activity, I need the central executive network. Now, I finished working and my mother says you can take a break and you can come back, and then I will correct your paper and give you your marks. What do I do in that time? Usually that's when the default mode network takes over, which is also known as a resting state network. This means that I'm not doing any activity. I'm just sitting and maybe binging on television, or I'm playing on my phone, or I'm just sitting in my chair and my mind is wandering and I'm doing a lot of self-referential thinking. What did I do today? My friend said this joke. It was so funny to see this from my bus window, right? Self-referential thinking, thinking in your mind. When you're teaching in class, you expect your child to have the central executive on. And when you have stepped out to talk to a colleague, you want the default mode to be on. When you step back in after talking to your colleague to continue with your lecture, you want them to switch back from default mode to central executive, right? Now, this anti-correlation means when central executive network is active, default mode typically should be switched off. When default mode is switched off, it's difficult for the central executive to be active, and therefore the two are anti-correlated. There are ways in which we can make both of them work well, and one exceptional example of this is mindfulness. Another example is meditation. When we do that, then the two can have a crosstalk and they can coexist. But otherwise, by and large, for most of us, we switch between these two as and when the demands happen. That switching happens because of the third system, which is known as the salience network, controlled by the insula and the anterior cingulate. Now, this switch most often is what we see is a default or is defunct in ADHD, in anxiety, in autism and spectrum disorder, and with learning disability. What happens is, say, for example, in autism, they're so involved in their own self-referential thinking that getting them to central executive mode on command, voluntarily they may do it, but when you ask them, that's when maybe there is stimming, maybe there is a tantrum, maybe there is a lot of crying and resistance, because the switch, the insula particularly, does not function properly. In ADHD, the switch comes at a cost. Now is study time, your playtime is over, come back home at 6 o'clock, and then you see there's an explosion, there's anger. But you sent me 5 minutes late. My friends took 10 minutes to come. So I have not finished playing for 1 hour. I've only played for 45 minutes. Now you've got to give me 15 minutes extra. And that 15 minutes is never 15 minutes. It'll go on for 20 minutes and then say, but you said 15 minutes. It's not over, and now you're interfering. That switch from default mode to central executive is a problem. Same thing with learning disability. They may be doing something, they may find it difficult for them to sustain their attention, and so they go off into mind wandering, and that's why their notes are incomplete, right? So it's always a problem in the switch. And so many of the current theories say that this switch needs to be trained to improve, and that will help with fixing with many of these deficits, right? Just to tell you, central executive network is responsible for your decision making, judgment, and actively maintaining information in working memory. The salient network is to orient. Something has changed in the environment, and you have to orient yourself to this. This requires your attention now. Playtime is over. Come back to study. Teacher has come back into the class after speaking to her colleague. Now it's time for me to focus. Switch happens because of the salience network. Now teacher is not teaching, or she's asking me to do work quietly. I must sit at my desk. That is autobiographical memory or self-referential thinking controlled by the default mode. All right. So the deficits that we see because of these various areas sometimes can act as a warning signal. When we're tired, when there's depression, when we're stressed, when we're sleep deprived, when there is excessive exposure to screens, when we're not physically fit, or when there are when the neurodiverse individuals are examined, we find there are deficits in executive functions. So we've spoken of umpteen examples. Maybe they're not good in conversations, maybe they're socially not aware, maybe they're not good in planning. Well, this is contesting, people can contest this, because parents will often tell me, well, they're good at planning. If they want to do something and it's of their interest, or maybe their friends are coming home, they're good at planning. But when it comes to studying for an exam, they're not good at planning. Yeah. So obviously, because they're not able to prioritize, and that again has to do with a deficit in working memory. Mental flexibility, not able to look at another person's perspective, inability to let go. I'm so angry that I will remain angry for 3 days. I don't know how to let go. Mental inflexibility. And disinhibition, or poor impulse control or inhibition. Anger is one of the fastest ways to indicate that inhibition is very has poor control, or you don't wait for your turn, or that turn taking is a problem, or you're not able to look at another person's perspective, and you react immediately. So all of these, of course, can impact the way you handle a child in a classroom. Lack of insight is what teachers often face, because they're okay with a child making a mistake. But if the child does not own up and say, I made the mistake, that's where they have a problem. Some children are very good at owning up, but a lot of them, like for example, we had a boy who we were evaluating for his impulse control, and one of the complaints was that he blurts out things without realizing that it can be mean and spiteful, and then he would react in anger if somebody said something to him. So he always assumed that people were saying mean things to him. And when we asked him, are you saying mean things? He said, no, why would I say mean things? And then when the assessment was going on, we had to assess him to see if there were executive function deficits. And then we gave him a break. So he walked into the next room, and we had the names of children who come to our intervention written out on the board. He looked at the name, and there was one name there which was the same as the name of a student in his class. He looked at that and said, oh my God, she's coming here. She's the naughtiest child in my class, right? She must be troubling you a lot. And then we looked at him and said, see, was that a mean thing to say? And then he said, no, why is it mean? It's the truth, right? So inability to have insight into one's own behaviors most often, which then leads to anger or aggression, inability to handle peer interactions because they're not able to check or control themselves. They have limited set of conversations. They would only talk to people who talk about cars. If they're not interested in cars, then they're not interested in talking, which then can appear to be poor social skills, and then they complain, nobody wants to talk to me. They're not able to stay on target and they cannot monitor their own goals, right? So typically, a teacher would then focus on, of course, academic skills, but they also talk about self-regulation and self-belief, which then might lead to improved motivation, which might lead to improved academic skills. Typically, this is what one would want to do. Even if you have a child who has executive function deficits, it interferes with all of this, but you would still expect them to regulate their behavior. The problem, you may even give them skills with which they should be able to regulate their behavior. For example, if you're getting distracted when you're studying, sit in a room with less distraction, or have a place, have a study room, let it be far away from, the living room, because your grandmother's watching television there. Sit at your table and study. But then, if the child has executive function deficits, then even this might be a problem, because a pen on the table and then they keep playing with the pen, or grandmother is watching TV in the living room, I can still hear it here and I get disturbed by that. So grandma should not watch TV when I'm studying, or grandma has switched off TV, poor grandma. Then there are children playing outside. So, everywhere they're not able to ignore distractions because of executive function deficit, not because your technique has not worked. Okay. We often do planning, we do monitoring, we set goals for them, we let them to look at and observe their own changes to gain control over these changes, to reflect on whether this is working or not, and reset goals according to that. And this is exactly how we talk to them. When we set those IEPs, when we do a lesson plan, we are taking all of this into consideration. But what we fail to account for are the deficits in executive function. If that were added into the ring, or into this whole formula, into the mix, what would happen? They enter the system or the cycle with enhanced cognitive functions, which then results in, one, better and improved self-awareness. Therefore, your feedback results in further enhancing their self-awareness, which leads to better setting of goals, being able to motivate oneself, and then to be able to say, okay, this is why I succeeded, this is why I failed, and therefore let me take feedback from my teachers and go back into the cycle again and again, right? So if you find that you are ticking all the boxes, but your child is not making progress, then probably you need to look at executive function training. So this executive function training is referred to as cognitive remediation, cognitive retraining, cognitive rehabilitation, or cognitive training. It's also referred to as neuroplasticity enhancement, or plasticity-driven intervention methods. These are all various names. What this really does is to present activities at increasing levels of difficulty repeatedly to stimulate those three networks, right? The frontoparietal and the temporoparietal networks, to be able to bring about a crosstalk between all of these. So, to facilitate both top-down control and bottom-up control, we need to train, and usually the training involves the core executive functions, which is attention, inhibition control, working memory, and mental flexibility. It could either be a manual program or it could be computerized. What evidence so far we have says that with ADHD or children, the training has resulted in improved inhibition, and also better connectivity in the frontal lobes, a better improved working memory as a result of that. Not just with children, adults, not just neurodiverse individuals, but individuals, say, with schizophrenia, with depression, with anxiety, with stress-related disorders, with people who've been struggling with habit changes, maybe smoking, maybe alcohol addiction. It could be, diet changes because of you wanting to work on your obesity. A lot of these training executive functions seems to have led to better and improved overall functioning. You're calmer, you're able to meditate for longer. Currently, the child that I called Arun, I'm working with him right now. And he says, he calls me auntie and he says, auntie, the after I talk to you, the next 2 or 3 days, you seem to be able to regulate my behavior. And I looked at him and I said, I'm just talking to you for an hour, one day in a week. Those other 2 days, you are doing the job, right? And he believes that it's because I'm controlling him that he's doing this. What he does not realize is whatever we speak of during the session, he is able to execute that over the next couple of days, right? So executive function training does help in not just with children, but across the board, across different diagnoses, and it generalizes to day-to-day behavior. And the changes oftentimes can be fairly long lasting. With this child, I used to see him from the age of 13. We did a lot of executive function training and then he went away. Now that he's doing his PG, he's struggling to cope. Till then, there were no challenges and he was functioning well. He came to me when he was in grade 8. He finished school, he finished junior college, then he finished graduation. No problems. Of course, there were interpersonal issues, but as far as academic issues were concerned, no problems. Now he's come back to me when he's doing his PG because of these emotional issues. And instead of working on the cold cognition, now we are working with hot cognition. So executive functions, the bottom line is that we can train it and we can help improve it. It's quite simple, and the most interesting part is that it's long lasting and it remains. So it is a permanent change in the brain. How do we achieve it? The simplest way of achieving it is to do activities, specific activities, which target specific regions in the brain, repeatedly at increasing levels of difficulty. So just to show you, as far as imaging is concerned, these are pictures that I have borrowed. Maybe next time I would have better pictures to show you, where after training, just to show you how plasticity means better connectivity in the brain. Let me explain. So this is one individual who was given these 3 activities. One was category fluency, which means tell me names of animals, right? So she found this very, very easy, and therefore her brain was pretty cool, literally, which means that it didn't heat up. The connections were not being used, and the blue-green indicates that the activity was a very, very low level activity in especially the temporal and the parietal regions, which means she was only accessing her memory of these items. There was no other involvement of the frontal lobes. And when an activity is effortless, this is how the brain responds to it. So simple, easy activities will bring about this kind of a response. Then we asked her to tell us names of words that started with P and A, for example. You could see similar regions in the brain, the temporal and the parietal lobes, but the color from blue-green changed to yellow, orange, and red. As you can see in this meter, low activity or zero activity, heightened activity. You can see heightened activity here in the parieto-occipital region, where she was accessing words based on sounds. Parietal lobes is responsible for phonemic awareness. So if I have to say per and words starting with per or words starting with a or o, then I'm activating this region and I'm putting stress on that region. So this is at 5-minute intervals, right? Or like 30 seconds of work and then a break, and then another 30 seconds and then a break. My bad. You can see that even in such a short span of time, the activation from being cool has gone to hot, which means the brain is actually getting heated up while it's doing this work. Imagine for 1 hour or 30 minutes, if I get her to do this activity, what will happen? And that's what we often do in our intervention session, right? And then this region was when she had a bunch of numbers that she had to add or subtract, or she had to count backwards, serial subtraction. You can see the time frame, 45 seconds with a 5-second interval. You can see the whole a little bit of the central frontal lobes, and then the temporoparietal regions. There's no green or blue at all, and you can see more of red and orange. Now, when people or parents often tell us, my child is refusing to come to your sessions because they find it difficult, what they're actually encouraging us to do is to keep the brain cool by giving them simple and easy activities. I can do that, but I will not be building neuroplasticity in the brain, because the philosophy of cognitive training builds on this, that when these cells are being taxed to the maximum extent, then the cells start firing, the neuronal responses start, electrical impulses start. When that happens, then the neuronal cells start generating, sprouting literally. And that's why, we call up a digital program Rewire, because the wires grow like your seeds germinate, the neurons will germinate in response to this stimulation. And then the Hebbian principle says cells that fire together wire together. So at the same time, all of these regions are firing, and then the connectivity between these regions will form, and that's how we build neuroplasticity. So if we don't tax the brain repeatedly and at increasing levels of difficulty, the brain is constantly going to be like this, and then the connections are not going to be formed. Of course, I'm not saying do this and produce stress in the child, but we need to have a good mix of these. And interestingly, for this same person, if after a week of training on the same activity again, we evaluated the brain, there is a good possibility that for the same activity, this mental math, this individual, the brain would reach this response and eventually go to this response. When that happens, then it's time for me to go to the next level of difficulty to bring the brain back to this, so that the connections become stronger. And that is how we achieve neuroplasticity. So there is evidence now that can actually show you that these connections are formed. Maybe next time we can look at showing you how the connections are actually built in the brain after, say, if we were to evaluate the brain at the beginning of the training and towards the middle and then towards the end, and put it all together, you will be able to see improved connectivity in the brain. And that's how we achieve the neuroplasticity, right? So when we find executive function deficits, there are specific tests which can be done. There are rating scales which are given. So for those children who are referred to us, even adults who are referred to us, we evaluate them, not only their intellectual functioning, but other cognitive abilities and executive functions. We evaluate them when we take history from them, when we gather information, description of their behavior from the teachers in school, from their peers if possible. And through rating scales, we observe them in our session when we are doing the assessment, and we have tests of executive functions. Once that's done, we identify those children who have deficits. Once we do identify that, then we run them through a series of activities. And I think we have time, maybe we could do 1 or 2 activities just to give you an idea of what I really mean by these activities, right? And then as we do that, for each individual, we start at a level. Say, for example, a child has very severe working memory deficits, then we might just say, okay, you count backwards from 20 to 1. Whereas a person has very, very mild or even borderline working memory deficits, we may say, okay, you say 316 minus 7, and you keep subtracting minus 7 from 316 till you reach 220 or something. And then, regardless of the age of the child, the working memory deficit or the severity of the deficit will help us to choose the level at which the program is pitched. And from there, then we take them forward. For example, I'm seeing a 40-year-old he had very, very moderate ADHD, and through the program, because he was high functioning, he was a gifted individual. He kept telling me, oh, I've guessed these numbers, so please change it. So instead of, typically I ask somebody to say, an adult to say 319 minus 7, and then count backwards for 10 times. So he said, -7, I'm getting used to it. So what can we do? So then he made a suggestion. He said, okay, alternate between once I -7, once I -8, and then let me do 10 sets of this and 10 sets of that. And I will keep remembering, you don't write it down, and I will know when to stop. So he taxed and challenged himself. This is not a level that I've done for anybody else, because I know he is gifted, therefore we could do this with him, right? So pitching the program at the level that is most suitable for that individual is important. The program should place increasing demand on the executive functions continually and incrementally. You have to increase the demand so that like I said, the cells that fire together will wire together. And when we do this repeated practice, which means if the individual does not have any other issues, does not have any diagnosis, but has executive function, like for example, I was seeing a 30-year-old, she was stressed at work, and because of that, executive functions had come really low. She had no other deficits, no other known diagnostic categories, and in 25 sessions, she was able to make complete recovery. Versus this other person that I just spoke about, 40-year-old, I saw him for a period of 3 months, where we did about 40 sessions over that a span of 3 months uh, to be able to bring about 80% change, right? So the more severe the deficits, the more global the deficits, the longer they may have to stay in intervention. But despite that, at best, a person might need to be in our program for about, say, 6 months at a stretch, then a break, and then another 3 months, another 3 months, maybe over a period of 2 years. And then we do see quite substantial progress. Regardless of the age of the individual, it could be very young children. We worked with 4-year-olds, we worked with 9-year-olds, we work with 15-year-olds. Like I told you, we worked with 30-year-olds. We've also worked with 90-year-olds. It is possible to improve executive functions. It could be manual or it could be computerized, and all of them seem to be having good outcomes. These are just to give you some examples of programs that exist. We have CanTab is an automated assessment battery, and they also have a few activities. I've not seen PATHS or CSRP in India, but we do have CogMed, which follows a similar module, which is an online training program. Rewire, as Vidya said in her introduction of me, is our cognitive training program. So we offer it manually. We also offer it online for those who can't come to us in person. And we also have our app, which is known as the Rewire program. So if you can see the logo, this is the logo. It's downloadable from Google Play Store. It has a number of games. 3 of them are free. But if you want a subscription-based program, then you have to subscribe to it. It's a monthly subscription. Once you subscribe, you have access to all the 10 games. And there are varying levels of the game. If you want, there is also an executive function test that you can take. But earlier, it used to be compulsory. We've now made it not compulsory. You can sort of train yourself on this, or you can avail of this for your children. If you're interested, of course, you can reach out to me. So we monitor your progress. And if you look at this is how we give you feedback. We have your rating of your performance after every level that you've done. We give you your scores. And this dial is how we tell children that the needle here is pointing to the red, even though it says average. Red means that you're at the lowest level, or level 1. The aim is for this particular, like the name of this game is Bake the Alphabets. Let's say Bake the Alphabet, this particular child is working in level 1. In level 1, you're in the red zone. If you have to go to level 2, then you must consistently, over 3 times that you use Bake the Alphabet level 1, you should be in the yellow or the green zone before you can move to the next level. And that's how, so you have, a number of games that is mentioned here, and that's how we encourage them to record their scores. If not, parents can or teachers can record their scores across these various domains. So we have all the core executive functions that are covered. And at the end of it, this is how we map their progress. So this particular individual was working on a game called Switcheroo. You can see this is a level 2 and has been using it across these many sessions. The total number of tries is shown by the blue graph or the blue line here. The red line talks about the accuracy. So I may have tried 10 times this particular, or I've answered 10 questions on that particular level, but I got 0 correct here. But towards the end, after so many uses, I tried it for about 25 times, or 25 problems I tried to solve, and I was able to solve 15 of them, all in the same time zone, right? So usually they're about 75 seconds each. So in the same time, my speed has increased, the number of tries I've done, and my accuracy has increased. And that is how we map the progress. So from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. So when the child started level 1, also quite likely the individual would have been here, like this, with a huge gap between the number of tries and number of correct responses. And towards the end, we see them being parallel or even catching up, as you see here, right? So different games. So this is a spell the word is a much more difficult activity for this child. So level 3, you can see, despite the fact that he has tried for so long, the gap between the number of tries and the accuracy continues to be quite significant, which means then between these two, switcheroo, the child is slowly getting better at level 3, and I might want the child to move to level 4 the next time I see the child. But with spell the word, I would encourage the child to use strategies to bridge this gap. And that's how, on a weekly contact, we help the child to bridge the gap. And over a period of time, we've been using this since the past 4 years, and we do see tremendous progress. Some children, especially the ones who have a widespread range of difficulties, might have to come for a hybrid session with us. Some children, we have to see them physically first, maybe 3 to 6 months, and then shift them onto rewire. For some children, we don't have to see them at all, and they all stay on rewire. So hybrid program, exclusively manual program, exclusively digital program. We've tried all of these, and we do see across the board changes in several areas, not just with cognitive abilities, but the changes come socially, the changes come in behavior, the changes come in emotions, the changes come in academics as well. I'm not saying we're able to cure the learning disability or ADHD, but we certainly are able to bridge the gap that they have when they come with us. So improved executive function results in more independent functioning. As you can see with all the 3 cases that I started off in the beginning, we did say that these were children that I have seen personally, and we've seen progress in all of them. They reached a certain level, and then when the challenges of that stage, they were not able to cope up, that's when they came back to me, right? So improvement across the board is seen not just with executive functions, but because the lower order executive functions improve, the higher order also in terms of planning, and then self-monitoring and goal setting also seem to improve, right? I know this has been a marathon session. My apologies. I'll leave you with this. And now I'm open for questions. I'm sure a lot of you have you would want access to my slides. I'm happy to share my slides later on, maybe either to Jayashree or someone. I'll share the slides, and then all of you can avail of them. Yeah, now I'm open for questions. Thank you for your patient listening.
Yeah, hi, ma'am.
Yeah, hi.
Great session, by the way.
Thank
I
you.
was just curious to know, in a situation with the comorbidities, say between ADHD and a mood disorder, how effective something of this program could be.
It's quite effective, and oftentimes, especially when we are working with adolescents and young adults, the overlap is quite significant. Many of them seek interventions or treatment largely for their emotional issues rather than for their ADHD. And we perchance discover that they have ADHD, earlier on, and that's how we hit upon it. Some of them are able to work through like a typical CBT or therapy programs for their emotional issues, but some of them are not able to work through their emotions. In such situations, they actually fall back on the cognitive training, and it really helps because it allows the default mode to be activated for you to take a step back and say, okay, this is why I'm getting anxious, or this is why I'm upset. And then they're able to work through their emotions because of the crosstalk between the central executive and the default mode, which happens after a training on executive functions.
Okay, and just another question on that. Would this also help with IDD, like, intellectual development
It does
disorders?
help. It does help quite a bit. I have often seen IQ points jump several points after the assessment. I'm not claiming that we make the child, more intelligent after going through our program, but I often look at it as the blocks that were interfering with the child being able to display his or her true skills get removed, and therefore the child is able to function better, and that's how the scores improve. We do see quite significant progress in the IQ levels. We work a lot with children who are borderline intellectual up till maybe an IQ point of, say, 50, 55, which is mild retardation. It works quite well with them as well. Of course, the difficulty level will have to be watered down quite a bit, but they're still able to make tremendous progress as far as their executive functions are concerned.
And this also involves like the ancillary benefits, like, social skills or just general
Yes.
life skills.
Yes, it does quite a bit
Oh,
without
oh,
having to teach them strategies.
great. Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Ma'am,
Yes, yes.
again, excellent session.
Thank you.
Really an eye opener, and could relate to a lot of it. Ma'am, I have a question about grit, determination, and instant gratification. So, any child struggling in this area, like mobile addiction or throwing tantrums when the mobile is not given, will these kind of therapies or help in that area as well, ma'am?
It does help tremendously. In fact, I had an adolescent who had dropped out of junior college because he was on screens. He was like 20 hours on screens in a day. That was the level of addiction, and he had decided he's not going back to his studies. And so, obviously, bright child had got 10 CGPA in his 10th grade and was refusing to go back to junior college. So the parents obviously reached out in panic. We tried the typical, detox and things like that to deal with the addiction. That didn't work. Then I put him on the cognitive training with me for 3 months. And he then finished his 12th. He did exceptionally well. And now he's pursuing his engineering. Right. So it is definitely possible. In fact, 3 months with me manually, and then a couple of months I put him on the rewire, knowing that he has a phone addiction. But it worked against, the addiction, because this is not a game, right? Though it's gamified, it's not like your PUBG or any of the other games which work on the reward principle. You have to work really hard to crack some of these tasks. And it helps tremendously because it works on the same dopamine pathways. The reward system works on the dopamine pathway. Although it taps into the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the executive functions tap into the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and we're able to do a top-down regulation on the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And that's how it works.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, ma'am. One question, ma'am.
Yes.
Thanks for the session, ma'am. Ma'am, the cognitive training, is it related to the ABA, or what kind of a training is this? Because when you are having an ADHD and ASD spectrum child, and what training you said we provide for 3 months, is it a parent-child related training? How do a parent follow this platform in home base or in the real life situation? How do it will help him lifelong? Because I have an ADHD child. So if I have a program, only if he's going with a therapist, he only works with the therapist. But when he comes to home, the tantrums follows with the parent. This is what is exactly scenario happening with a parent. So I
Right.
want to know this training, what you provide, the cognitive training, how well does it place, and in what age does a child, fit into this program, and
Right.
how effective a parent can work with a child for this program. This is what
Okay.
my question is, ma'am.
Sure, sure. Very important question. Thank you so much for that. So we don't work with the parents initially. Our focus is primarily on the child, right? A lot of times you're able to see the tantrums because of the inflexibility or the difficulty to control his impulses. Even though he's aware he should not say this or do this, he is not able to control himself, and that's what leads into a tantrum or a meltdown. We work with the child and we don't give the child strategies, because if you notice in an ABA, they may give you strategies and they may even talk to the child about the strategies he should use in a XYZ situation. The child is able to understand it when you are describing and even tell you, because at that time he is calm. But the moment you put him in a situation where he gets riled up, he forgets these rules, and that's when the meltdown happens, right? So what we do is we facilitate, and the ability to remember the rules and to execute them, you need to have intact frontal functioning, which is what this program does. We strengthen the frontal lobe functions, which then helps the child to be able to remember these rules and then use it in a situation. So say for the first 3 months, we don't see the parents at all. And a lot of parents have complaints with us about that you don't tell us what you're doing with my child. I don't know. Every time the child comes and sits in your room, and then we don't know what happens. We are kept in the dark. Guilty as charged. I know that we do that. But unfortunately, that's the nature of the program. We train the child directly. Maybe in the first month, you may not see much of a change, but by the end of the second or the third month, for sure, you're going to start seeing changes. The changes would be that when you give instructions to your child, or when you are, let's say, you're disciplining the child, initially there would be a meltdown. Then the child will have a meltdown which lasts for a brief time. But by the end of the third month, the child will say, I see where you're coming from, but I still feel like this and I want to do this, right? The negotiation, the conversations happen. There's less meltdown, less crying. And finally, then the child will be able to catch himself or herself doing it and then stop it. Like the story of my Arun, where he said, I know I'm depending on my parents a lot, and I want to move away from that, and I want to be independent and do things on my own. So that insight is what we are building. So many a times we don't work with parents, not that we should not or cannot, but the nature of the program is to strengthen the child initially. We do that, and then we also, maybe towards the second set of 3 months that we work with the child, we also involve parents in terms of what they can do to deal with the behavior at home, and then we monitor both simultaneously. It is not ABA. ABA is an application of behavior modification, where you look at the behavior of the child, look at what are the antecedents and the causes, and then help the child to understand consequences. And you put consequences in place so that the child understands the connection between behavior and consequences. We work at the level of the brain, and we allow the brain to bring about the control in the child's behavior. And that's how we build neuroplasticity in the brain. So it is like building muscles in the brain, not giving you strategy. So initial work is with the child. Like I said, the child can be brought to us, or if you want to work with Rewire, for example, you can monitor the child's progress, and then we can hold your hand in terms of get on weekly calls with you to figure out how you can further refine the program to help your child.
Okay, yeah, ma'am, got it. And how about the child who's not verbal so much? Like my child is not verbal, so how do I work with him? So how much this program will be effective for him? He is minimal, only need-based communication is there. So how
Right.
does this program help such child? Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a
So
non.
instead of the manual program, then maybe the digital or the Rewire program would help, because there the child does not have to give any verbal responses, but still the executive functions can be improved. As that happens, I'm not saying the child will become more verbal, but the child will become more independent and more sort of stable as far as behavior and emotions are concerned. And then
Yeah,
you
because
can, that's where you
because
would find
communication is a
challenges.
problem, ma'am. They are not communicating in the classroom. They are
Correct.
left out alone. Though they are in the IEP plan, all that said and done. But when the communication is a real challenge for these kids, for the
Correct.
ASD kids and the other spectrum kids. So
Right now, we do
how
have a
well,
child.
yeah,
Yeah, we
yeah.
do have a child who has only minimal conversation, and we are quite happy to note that her conversations have improved quite significantly since she started coming to us. And outside of this thing, the parents are very happy because she now wants to go out and interact with children in her community and things like that, and she's volunteering to interact with them, and we can see the change in her.
Okay, so the age wise, like if he is 9, so he can develop a good communication. Does it cognitive training will help him? That is what,
Cognitive training
and
will
the
help.
age.
Yeah, but I don't know about the communication, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
we are focusing on the executive functions. If communication is hampered because of executive functions, then it will improve. Otherwise, despite poor communication, the child will still be more functional, is how I would sort of interpret that.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Sure. There were a few questions in the chat box, I think. Is it possible to take up online training? Yes, it is. And then there's someone says, my child is 6 years, 10 months old, low IQ, ASD with global delays, minimally verbal, not enrolled in school. Will your session help? We could try. Unless we see the child, it would be difficult for me to say it. But we do have children with minimal verbal output and with low IQ, and we do see quite a bit of progress in these children. For Rewire is a digital program which can be downloaded on your phone, and you can work with the program on your Android phones. It doesn't work on the iOS or the Apple phones. Either tabs or phones, Android you can use. It can be downloaded on your phone at home. You can do it. And backend data we have access to. We can see the progress of the child, and once a week we can monitor, or alternatively, we can get online, like say through a Zoom call or on Google Meet. We have therapists who can take the child through activities, and we can do that.
Excuse me, could I ask a question?
Sure, sure.
Then would you suggest that most kids who are neurodiverse should necessarily undergo EF assessment and then subsequently EF training to maximize their functioning?
If you'd ask me, I would definitely say yes, because that seems to be the missing link. And like I said in the beginning, we are so focused on academic functions, we don't realize that EF is a building block to academic functions, and intact EF means better and improved academic functions. So, in fact, if you follow Dr. Adele Diamond's work, she says weave it into the school curriculum, the approach of improving executive functions. And with a lot of preschools and play schools in Canada, they do use, she calls it Tools of Mind. You can look it up. And it's a beautiful program, and it's woven into the school curriculum. Everybody, not just somebody who's neurodiverse, anybody and everybody can benefit from improved executive functions.
And you also mentioned that like kids on the spectrum, like they are most of the times in the default mode network.
Yes.
And they're not able to attend they're not able to execute their central executive networks. So like there we see a lot of difference with kids on the spectrum for attention to people versus attention to objects. So would the central executive network imply to both, or how is it different when it comes to attention to people, like what networks are recruited versus attention to objects?
Yeah, phenomenally good question, Aradhana. So with the ASD, their default mode is more active, for sure, we know that. The primary issue is not so much central executive, because like you rightly pointed out, their central executive is fine. when it's a task of their choice, they're able to pay attention to a point where you can't break their attention and pull them out of that activity. They're so engrossed in it, right? So they, by sort of design, the default mode and the central executive are very strong. The problem lies in the salient mode, where the insula is what is a problem. So by working on the insula and particularly the switch, we are able to iron out and have a balance between the default mode and the central executive, and that's how they become more functional with ASD. So even though it appears like we are doing the same thing for all the diagnosis, the way it works for each one of them, obviously the mechanism will differ. In ASD, we know we are targeting the insula. For ADHD, we know we are targeting the orbitofrontal cortex. For learning disability, we know we are targeting the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So the focus of the for the three categories change depending on the deficit profile that the child presents with.
Could I please ask a follow-up question to this?
Sure, sure.
So when you say that in ASD you are targeting the insula, then does it mean that we are targeting the core deficit in autism, or no matter where the child is on the spectrum, on the social skill, core social skill deficit, and that is what you're kind of trying to do
Yes.
when you're doing the executive functions with children on the spectrum? And
yes, yes.
and
So
that I'm trying to understand as to how that can be done. That is done through the program, because that primarily is attention to people and awareness of people and like social. So how, by not like it is not in the realm of social that we are building these skills. So then how does it translate to improvement in social engagement is what I'm having difficulty understanding.
right. So if you remember, initially I spoke of hot and cold executive functions. In ASD, from the insula, we are also looking at the hot executive functions, which has to do with emotions, which has to do with social perception. But for that to be intact, we need the insula to be able to function properly. So we then move on to more rooting the program in a more social context. And we use a lot of social cues when it reaches that stage. But to be honest, there are very few children who have been with us for that long, and we've started working on social perceptions. But affective neuroscience is a whole set of activities by itself, and the hot cognitions is what they focus on at that point in time. So you need to start off with cold executive functions and then move on to hot executive functions.
So you mean to say even a child who is completely non-verbal, much like for 5 years old kid also you kind of work with and you've seen improvements overall?
Yes, overall, but not so much with the verbal output. We've had very, very limited success with verbal output. So, which is why I'm reiterating that again and again, that we cannot make them verbal, but we can iron out their executive function deficits for sure.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Any more questions? Last question for the day.
If no one has any, then I would like to ask one more. Yeah,
Sure.
oh, please go ahead if anyone else has. I've already asked many.
You can go ahead, Arana.
Yeah.
We'll end with that.
Yeah. So you also said that between the, if mindfulness helps kind of keep both online, both the networks online. So, and at one point in time, you said you can't have both functioning together, both the networks functioning together. So I didn't quite understand that.
Okay. As it stands, we cannot activate both together. So they are, one is task positive and the other is task negative. Default mode is task negative and central executive is task positive. But with repeated practice in meditation and mindfulness, you can have both working simultaneously, which is actually an evolved functioning, right? And if you want to, without going into too many details, the brain waves, you have alpha, beta, delta, gamma, and theta. The alpha and the theta waves are where we are not asleep, but we are active. And beta is the central executive, right? Meditation helps us to be in a relaxed but in a more aware state, which is how it's able to balance out and keep both active at the same time. So, which is why we're able to access a lot more of our central executive while we are still at rest and at peace.
So then would you suggest that even kids kind of are kind of introduced to a lot of kind of like the Brahmari pranayam and the other pranayams to be able to kind of execute their, bring online their...
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
There's definitely merit in that. If they can do that, it'll be very, very helpful.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Those who can switch on the videos, at least end of the session, can you do, please?
Ma'am, can I ask only one question?
I think you have typed it in the chat box, is it?
Yes, yes, ma'am. That is what I want to ask. Yes, ma'am. Whether any therapy session given in Tamil, because my child is more comfortable in Tamil rather than English. English he can understand simple words, so I just need to ask.
We can definitely support. There at the moment there are, but we can definitely see how we can facilitate that for your child. Surely.
How much is the charge per session, or it is for monthly session?
It's a monthly charge. Maybe you can contact us and we can talk about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Ma'am, you have any institute in Bangalore, ma'am?
We are in Bangalore. Yes, we are in Bangalore.
I can share
give the details
of
to
your contact.
Jaya ma'am. Yeah, I can give the details to Jaya ma'am. Can share with us.
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
But it's an online platform, ma'am, because I am not in India. So the cognitive training can be done online.
It can be done online. Yes, yes, we are doing it online. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. I think I've really overshot the time. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize.
Problem,
Thank you.
No problem, ma'am. It was quite an insightful session. Now I request Nandini to give the takeaways of the session, please.
Ma'am, for such a wonderful webinar. Though the weather outside is quite cloudy and gloomy, but I think our brains were completely sort of engaged, completely focused, and you spoke about attention, right? And that I think never wavered, right? And as you even mentioned about cells that fire together, wire together. I think today's session definitely, I think, is has strengthened all our neural connections. I think for a slightly lasting learning, right? So it's my pleasure to conclude this session with and thanking on behalf of Brindavan. I think such an insightful, session, so much of knowledge and certain key takeaways. I think I must mention. We learned about endogenous attention. You spoke about, and beautifully started with three different stories and scenarios of students, and it actually made us think of the deficits, what is actually contributing. It really made us think, right? That was one. And I think you even spoke about driving. I mean, so beautifully, I think you related it to make it very simple for us to understand the endogenous attention, exogenous attention, and scenarios, and connecting beautifully into the classroom, right? When once the principal enters, what happens, what shifts. I think, and you also beautifully spoke about inhibitory control. I think sort of acting like an internal brake, right? And subthalamic nucleus. I mean, these terms might have sounded really complicated, but there is so much behind frontal, temporal. I think you kept all our part of brains really working. Thank you so much for that. I think such a wonderful session. That's what I'm lost with words now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you, ma'am.
Thank you,
It was
ma'am.
wonderful.
Thank
Akila,
you.
ma'am, Surya wants to say hi.
Yeah. Hi, Surya.
Hi. Surya has been with Akila, ma'am, from past 1 year, and we could see significant improvement. So he's from that time he wanted to say hi, Akila ma'am. He was just roaming and saying hi, Akila ma'am, hi, Akila.
So
Thank you,
sweet
ma'am.
of
It
him
was
to control himself so much.
yeah. I told end of the session you have to
So,
say, and he was waiting for that.
How sweet.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah.
Nice.
Pleasure.
Thank
Pleasure
you,
is mine.
ma'am.
Yeah. Thank
Thank
you.
you, ma'am. It was
Jayashree,
wonderful.
I'll
Thank
share
you
the
so much.
PPT with you and you can share it with the
Yeah,
participant. Yeah.
yeah, and
Okay.
I'll share the phone number and other details.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Jayashree
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
See you.
Thank you.